What is up, Pitt fans? Thank you so much for tuning in to Inside the Panthers on YouTube. My name is Stephen Thompson. Here with my partner, Dominic Campbell. We talked about the football transfer news and everything that went wrong or seems like it's going wrong for the Panthers in that area in our last video. But this time we are taking a little bit more of a positive look. We're going to shift over to the basketball sides of things where both the men and the women are adding instead of subtracting through the transfer portal. Some exciting times over at the Peterson Events Center. Let's start with the men, Dom. They made two big transfer portal additions this week in the form of Florida State transfer Cam Corin and Houston transfer Damien Dunn. I want to start with Corin since he was first. What do you see in the former Florida State Seminole, a sophomore? Seems like a center, but what do you make of him, and would you react, or how did you react when you first heard the news that he was coming to Pitt?
Well, I don't think it was too surprising that he did end up coming to Pitt. I think most recruiting sites had him pegged to come to Pitt. I think people are pretty unsurprised to see him commit, but it's a good signing. I think Pitt needs bigger guys, 6'10", 225 pounds. That's someone you want at the 4, even the 5 position where he might feature the most, depending on who else they might bring in this offseason. But one of his best games was against Pitt last month, early March, 9 p.m. game that we all dislike, but we were there, and he dropped 25 points. If I recall correctly, I think he
Yeah, career
did well
high.
from the line, and he did pretty well overall. And a pretty Pitt was going to win this game. They always looked like they were going to win for the most part. It was just whether Florida State could cut it, what deficit they would cut it to, and they kept it close, mainly through him. So he'll be at a place he's familiar with to some extent and did well prior. So that's obviously a good sign to have someone who did well at your own court. Um, and yeah, I'm excited to see what he can do going forward. I think he's a big. Pitt needs more physicality down low. They were bossed around last year, and they need someone with a bit more weight and a bit stronger. And I think he's a really good addition. But I think one important thing is that he's a former AAU teammate of point guard Jalen Lowe. That's someone that's
Mhm.
really big. Having that high school connection to now and bring that together. I'll be really excited to see what those two can do.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even without the AAU connection, I mean, I thought that this could be a really dangerous connection for the Panthers. I think Lowe is going to take a real big step forward in terms of his playmaking ability and his scoring. But that playmaking ability, I mean, having a guy who is a lob threat, a guy who can score on the inside, a guy with a little bit of muscle, some post moves, things like that. I think Corin brings a completely different dimension to this team offensively that they haven't had. I mean, I'd venture to say all except for 1 year, but even the year I'm thinking of, Mo Gee wasn't exactly a post threat. Pitt hasn't really had an inside scoring threat like this at all during Jeff Capel's tenure, all 6 years. So I think it's really exciting to see a guy like Corin who is not just a tremendous offensive rebound, doesn't just get dunks and layups off of his teammates passing to him, but he's got a little bit of a post game that's growing and really came along strong towards the end of the year. He's got, a nice little mid range jumper that's growing as well. But this guy knows how to score around the rim. He's extremely efficient scoring around the rim. He can score through contact because he's got a little bit of weight and athleticism to him. I like you said, I'm all in on this signing. I think he is a really great addition for the Panthers at a position of need. I mean, even before losing Federico, I think they needed an extra big and they needed a starting caliber center. And I think Corin can be that guy. You look at their current kind of center depth chart, for lack of a better term. I mean, I think the guy immediately behind Corin right now is Papa Conte, and then behind him you'll have incoming true freshman Amdi Nadie. I think Guillermo Diaz-Graham played the center spot a lot last year, but that was more out of necessity, I think, than in terms of where his true fit is. I think Diaz-Graham is a much better 4 than he is a 5 because of his weight. Because I also don't think he is the best technical defender in the world. He can block some shots because he's 7 feet tall, but I don't think he slides his feet particularly well, and I don't think he's a great post defender. So I think this is also a really advantageous move for him as well, because you can play Corin at the 5 and then Diaz-Graham, who I think the program is pretty high on, the coaching staff is pretty high on, can kind of move to a more natural position as a 4 where he's playing on the perimeter a little bit. He's not having to guard guys like, an Efton Reed or a Kyle Filipowski or, you know, Norchad Amir. Pick any of your really good physical centers that you've seen throughout the ACC over the past couple of years. Diaz-Graham doesn't really have to deal with those guys anymore. Defensively, offensively, he can be a much better, shooting threat, a ball handler things like that, a wing, and focus a little bit more on offense as opposed to giving all his energy to trying to contain a real physical post player. So I agree. Really good signing at a position of need, and it happened real quickly. I mean, it was 2 days after, not even 2 days. I think less than 24 hours after he left Pittsburgh from his official visit, he was committed to becoming a Panther. The other addition, I want to talk about Damien Dunn from Houston. Kind of fills at least one of the guard spots that they seem to have open with Bob Carrington heading out. What do you make of Dunn, a real older guy, a veteran transfer from Houston and Temple? What do you think he'll bring to the Panthers next year?
Like you just mentioned, being a veteran is really important. I mean, he's been around for a while. Was at Temple, was at Houston last year. Obviously, has experience in the NCAA tournament, but I think some fans might be a bit, iffy on his performance last season with Houston. But I think having a bit more of a production role, like he'll have more production this year because I think he'll see more minutes on the floor. Will be a bit more beneficial to him. He did do pretty well at Temple. I think his stats at Temple, if you look at them, are pretty solid. Not nothing that jumps out of the water as terms of a player, but I think he's a guy that will give you important minutes either off the bench or starting, and he'll be really good just being able to score and fill some of the void, I would say, with Carrington going to the NBA.
Yeah, Carrington and Henson gone. They're going to need some scoring, and I think especially Dunn's time at Temple proves that he can score. He's been in two wildly different situations. I mean, you look at the Temple teams that he was on and what he was doing from his freshman to his, I believe, his junior or his senior seasons. This was a guy who's expected to be a real massive offensive engine for a team that just plainly wasn't very good. They didn't have a ton of scoring depth. They weren't particularly talented, and Dunn really had to carry the load along with one or two other guys most years, and ended up not being very successful. I think it drove down his efficiency a little bit. And then he goes to Houston, where he really has to ramp up his defense. He has to become a much better defender to fit into what Kelvin Sampson wants to do there, but also he's taken a back seat to guys like Jamal Shed and LJ Cryer, guys like that. He was at a loaded position at a really good school at a Final Four contender. It was natural for him to take a step back there. I think Pitt represents somewhat of a healthy medium for him, where he can be a scorer. He's going to have the ball in his hands, and the Panthers are going to need him to do quite a bit, but he won't be relied upon the same way that he was at Temple. You'll have Jalen Lowe, who's there to score. You'll have Ish Leggett, who scores, and I expect that they'll add another wing that can score and has some proven scoring ability. You also have Corin, like we mentioned. So just not as much will be on his plate as there was at Temple, but there'll be a little more on his plate and a little more room for him to maximize his potential than there was at Houston. And if they can get the same kind of defense from him that he played at Houston, I mean, obviously you're going to take a step back when you move on from being coached by a guy like Kelvin Sampson, who's one of the better defensive coaches in all of college basketball right now. But I mean, at 6'5" and more than 200 pounds, I think he's got the size to be a really good defender and the tools and the athleticism. So it's really just all about, can he replicate what he did at Houston as far as being a catch and shoot guy? I mean, I think, I was looking up stats earlier today, and he was, I think, in the 77th percentile of effective field goal percentage in terms of catch and shoot opportunities. So I think, his shooting, you look at his 3-point shooting and it's real inconsistent across the board. You kind of don't really know what to make of him. But I think that, you put him in the right spots. You put him in a place where Jalen Lowe and Ish Leggett can set him up, and he's really going to thrive. And then I think he also gives you some kind of tough shot making when you're in a pinch, kind of like what Ish Leggett brought to them last year, just a guy who can get you a tough bucket when it seems like things are going kind of south. I don't think the Panthers are done building their roster. And with that in mind, how do you kind of look at the way this team is currently constructed right now, knowing that they might add some people? But if you had a game tomorrow, if you had a game in a few hours and you had to build a starting lineup out of what the roster looks like right now, how do you think you'd order it? What's the first five that you'd send onto the floor?
Well, Jalen Lowe for sure. I guess Zach Austin again. I mean, he started a lot last year. You have a guy that has experience, can defend closer to the paint, but it can also spread the floor as on offense, shoot some threes, and go and make some acrobatic dunks, as people love to see. Ish Leggett was a 6-man last year, but I guess right now I would start him. I don't. I mean, unless Capel thinks Dunn's more capable, or he wants Leggett to come off the bench again and be more productive that way. I like Leggett as a starter next season. I think he's earned it. Um, listen, being a six man of the year is fine, but you don't want to always be that. So, um, and then Corin at probably the 5, I guess, right now, or maybe the 4, depending on whether or not Conte or Ndaye are ready to play. I mean, Conte's coming off a season-ending injury last year, and Ndaye is going to be a true freshman. So, up to whether or not Capel thinks either of those two are capable to start at the 5. And then, I mean, that's pretty much what I would do. I think Lowe, Leggett, Austin, Corin, and then I guess Corin at the 4 for right now. Maybe then you could have Conte at the 5. That's probably what I would do, at least probably for right now. But then I guess it depends on whether he wants Guillermo to play at like the 4 start there. I think it's just the lineup's a little bit different than last year, so I'm just like picturing how this would work in
Yeah.
my head. And it's
Yeah.
like,
I mean, it's complicated. I mean, you've got a bunch of guys who I think are capable of starting, who show that they could start, and you got to make room for all of them. I think that's the thing, that this is going to be, I venture to say, a deeper team than they were last year, especially because there is still room to grow. They still have 2 scholarships left to use, and they're being pretty aggressive with who they're still pursuing to fill those spots. So I I disagree with you in a couple spots. I think you're right. Low, I'm gonna pencil in as a starter right now. I think you can put that one pretty much in Sharpie. I'd say Leggett is also pretty much a lock to start, I would have to imagine. Just because the guard depth is not that good just yet, you know? Like, I don't think they're that deep where you have, you don't have a Jalen Lowe that you can bring off the bench, on this team, I don't think. I don't think you have, 3 guards that are, I don't know. I don't think you have enough guys where you could say, yeah, like Leggett, we don't need you on the floor first or on the floor for all these minutes. So I'm putting Ish Leggett in that starting lineup as well. I'm not sending Zach Austin out there as a starter, at least at this point. I think he was not a very consistent shooter and not consistent enough in the way that they would have needed him to be. His defense was good, but it wasn't as across the board impactful, I thought. I think he had some nice blocks and everything like that, but I don't think his kind of man-to-man defense was anything remarkable, and I think Dunn can honestly bring you a little bit more versatility. I think he can be just as good, if not, you know, not noticeably different of a three-point shooter, especially in catch and shoot situations, which was pretty much all that Zach Austin did. Um, but I think you throw Dunn in the starting lineup for Austin at his spot, and I think you go 3 guards to start. And honestly, I'm putting Guillermo Diaz-Graham in there at the 4, man. I'm pretty high on him. I think he showed some flashes of a really strong offensive game. I think you factor in another season where he could put some weight on. We can get a little bit stronger. He can get that handle a little tighter. And then obviously he brings a scoring punch as a shooter, as he proved last year. And he still maintains some of that size advantage that the Panthers had last year. They were one of the bigger teams in all of college basketball. Um, and then I think Corin is at the 5. I mean, he's the most experienced guy. I'm not relying on Ndiaye or Conte, who both have not played a minute of college basketball yet. So a couple true freshman guys. One of them's coming off an injury. I think they both have potential, especially Conte. But just at this point, I mean, I think you got to go with the more experienced guy, and that's Corin, who's played in the ACC for 2 years, been a full-time starter for one of them. So I think that'd be my starting 5. It'd be Lowe, Leggett, Dunn, Diaz, Graham, and Corin, at least as it stands right now. But who knows? Things could definitely change a lot over the next few months as they round out the roster and finish their recruiting efforts this summer. Let's jump over to the women's side for a little bit. Not as much going on over there, but they did add a transfer from Clemson, their first addition of the offseason. If I'm not mistaken, Michaela Elmore. What do you know about Michaela? What is she going to bring to the Panthers? And what do you envision her role being for this team next year?
well, a player. They need some forwards. They lost a lot of forwards
Bodies,
last
yeah.
year. Obviously, Leah Two King, the big loss, but unsurprising. I think she probably wants to go somewhere different in her final season of eligibility. All ACC, first team, most improved player in the ACC, well deserved. She averaged basically a double double. I mean, almost 20 points and I think 10 rebounds a game, and she was great in other aspects like steals, blocks. So what Pitt needs to do really is just try and like offset all the production she had and spread that out because she was the only option Pitt had watching those games. Like Leah Tukin was the only option. So you have someone like Michaela come in. And she'll be a player that can not only get some rebounds and be a force down the paint. She's 6'3". She's already so she'll be one of the taller players in the team. But she'll be able to score down the paint, and she could shoot 3-pointers. I mean, Pitt needs another shooter. I mean, they had Leah King, and they've had some other players that can shoot. But I mean, like Bella Perkins, for example. But you need a forward that can shoot in this day and age, and it can't just be one player. You got to have probably one or two good shooting forwards, unless you have someone that's 9 or 10 at the women's game, which is generally not the case. Most of them are around 6'5". So they just need bigger players. They need some forwards. The only other returning forwards they have are Lauren Rust, who's a sophomore and didn't play a lot as a true freshman, and Kiara Williams, who is a true freshman. So really, they need more experienced players, and you have someone who's played in the ACC. I mean, I know Clemson didn't have a ton of success in recent years, but they have been better than Pitt, and I think Michaela Elmore will be an important piece for this team next season. I think she's going to be pretty solid, I would say.
I'm interested. You say she's a shooter and that they need one of those. I'm looking at these stats. She's only shot 31.9% from 3-point range. I think that was last year. I can't tell if that's last year or over the course of her career, but what do you make of that? I mean, do you think that she can improve enough to be a better 3-point shooter than 32% for the field, or is that going to be good enough?
Well, it'll be better than not being able to shoot. I mean, think about Leah King. I obviously like her game a lot, but she never shot a three. So, like, she could shoot. She shot incredibly well from mid range and could drive and could post people up. But like, I think you need players that can get the floor out and allow other players to succeed. I think one of the problems Pitt has had, not only just not having as good of players as other teams, and that's why they've struggled in the recent years. It's just not having people to spread the floor out. Like one year they were okay, but they always drove to the rim, and then teams were like, okay, well, we're just going to force you to shoot threes. And then when they did, they were bad. They were not very good. So it's like you need someone that can at least try to force the issue. But again, it's just another player. They really just need – she can shoot. I mean, her stats maybe aren't like what looks amazing initially, but I think Tory Verdi is a serious coach. I think he's had success building programs up. So I think him being able to use like, well, I built Leah King up to be the player that she should be. Maybe I can get another player like Michaela Elmore and put her – in a position to maybe have a much better season than she's ever had at Clemson here at Pitt this following season.
Gotcha. Makes a ton of sense. Real quick before we end this video, I want you to tell me a little bit about the two visitors that Pitt had on campus. Pitt women's basketball had on campus this month. We're talking about Destiny McFall and Celia Riviera. Could you tell me about those two JUCO transfers, players, who are looking to move up to the next level? What can you tell me about them?
Well, they're both from Northwest Florida State College, and they both had great success these past 2 seasons. They won the national championship at the Division I JUCO level last season. They were runners-up this season. And both big parts of those teams, McFall and Riviere, both started most of their games these past 2 seasons. McFall's a very good player, loves to drive to the rim, can shoot really well, can distribute for her teammates. She's also a pretty solid player defensively, makes a few steals, and does pretty well on ball. Riviere's a 6'3" as well. Again, height, Pitt needs that. And she's strong. She's played for France at the U20 level. They won the U20 European Championship. So, I mean, that's important to have. And just having some winning mentality. I mean, these players, if they could land them, would be huge. I think not just having some talented players come in from the JUCO level, but having people that have won. You need winners to build a winning program. And as much as a coach can try and instill that, you need players that have won as well. So if they can land these two players who have a ton of interest from loads of schools, West Virginia was after them, and a lot of other teams that have made the NCAA tournament are a bit more successful than Pitt. But I think what Pitt's going to offer probably is both of them to come and both of them to start, which I think is a promising prospect, even if the team may not have had the greatest season last year. But Verdi is going to do a lot to get them in. I think the recruiting staff, Verdi and his recruiting staff, are really working to bring these players in. So it would be great if they could. Not 100% that they'll do that. I think it's more 50-50. But yeah, I mean, you can't fault the women's basketball staff. They're really trying to bring some players in. So interesting to see who else they will bring in over the next few weeks.
Absolutely. Really interested to see if they can land these two players to add to what they've got in Elmore and what they're trying to bring to the table for next season and hopefully improve on a lackluster, last few years. We can go back even further than that. But anyway, exciting times at the Peterson Event Center. The Panthers getting tons of interest from transfers. They are showing interest in transfers, and they are bringing guys in, reloading their rosters for the 2024-25 season. I appreciate y'all tuning in to this video as we break down Pitt basketball's transfer moves. Make sure to like this video, subscribe to us on YouTube, youtube.com/Inside the Panthers, and follow all of our reporting from football, basketball, off seasons, and much more at si.com/college/Pittsburgh. Like I said, thank you all for tuning in, and I will see you next time.